the gum... I don't know, the gum's just not one of those episodes that just really stands out to me. It was fine. I would definitely say this is probably one of my least favorite episodes. Just because it was just there. Like, I'm sure some people probably found it entertaining. Kramer, taking Lloyd Braun, who returns, except this time he's played by Matt McCoy, instead of, I think it was... I can't remember the name of the guy who played him back in the Non-Fat Yogurt, but this is a return of him. I believe he appears in one more episode, I think. I can't remember. But I don't know. Just the story was fine, but it just wasn't one that just stands out to me. It wasn't horrible, but it just not a big standout episode. The idea for this came, I believe, from Andy Ackerman, who knew someone who basically restored like an old theater that basically plays a lot of like old time movies, basically. Kramer, of course, who likes to invest in different things, invests in the Alex's Theater, and his business partner ends up being Lloyd Braun, George's old neighbor who he can't stand, that his mom would definitely love to see him as. Basically, George looks at him as, oh, that's the guy my mother would rather see as her son than me. But apparently he finds out that Lloyd apparently had a big mental breakdown, and went into like a psych hospital, I believe it is, after he had lost his job with the government. Of course, he still has his resources with them, Kramer basically is taking Lloyd under his wing, and he's basically like just protecting the hell out of him. Basically, basically telling everybody, do whatever Lloyd says, don't make him upset. And it just drives everyone nuts. Especially Jerry. Jerry was like the biggest victim of it in this episode completely. Such as, of course, when they first see Lloyd, he offers them gum. George, not really a gum chewer. Jerry wasn't, really, crazy about it. But of course, Kramer told them they had to take the gum to prove Lloyd's not crazy. And it wasn't anything that special, Jerry. It's like, he's fine the one time, but of course he had to love the gum. He had to want the gum again. So basically, throughout the episode, they keep try to get Jerry to come with him to see the guy where the gum comes from and to buy more of that gum from him, even though Jerry has no interest whatsoever. Of course, Elaine had a history with Lloyd Braun, briefly dated him, and she's wondering if maybe their breakup had anything to do with his his breakdown he had and whatnot. But of course, Elaine wants to avoid Lloyd because she doesn't want Lloyd to think that she's leading him on or anything. But unfortunately, I think those plans fail miserably because of her mishaps. She keeps running. First off, the main thing is she keeps running into this guy who likes to spray his hose on the street. And Elaine, is just not crazy about it. She tells the cops, tells him to stop spraying his hose for the fun of it or whatnot. But was also like kind of like a backstory to this. So there's an extra, Ruthie Cohen, who was the cashier, just in the background. I guess, Tom Gamble and Max Pross had recognized that, and they gave her a couple lines in this. She wasn't really, she wasn't really an actor or whatnot, but, because she's been, in, besides Dubin, she appeared in 101 episodes, but of course it's the only one she actually had dialogue in. So they have the story there where George thinks that Ruthie shortchanged him. He says he paid in a 20, and she only paid him back as change as if he had paid a 10, I believe it was. So, and he claims that he had, because he thinks that because he had like a $20 bill, I think it was, with red lipstick on it, I think it is. So that's why he thought he got shortchanged, which the cashier, refuses to, admit. Of course, while she's trying to get her to open the drawer, Lloyd sees him, and George is trying to buy a piece of gum for her to open up the drawer, and he, of course, doesn't find the bill there at all, but he still thinks that she shortchanged him. He also sees an old neighbor of his, who, of course, admires George's car, and he used to like to work on cars. And of course, George mentions again that the car belonged to John Voight, which of course, he covers up the fact that it's John Voight, the dentist, not the actor. And his daughter Dina, who is like friends with George growing up, sees George, and George is telling her about what's going on with Lloyd and everything. And then she says something about how her father had a little bit of like a mental breakdown himself, and it's why he quit his car business. And he realized that he was kind of like banging his hammers on the inside hood of the car. So he was concerned that he was going to ruin George's John Voight car, which ends up happening because his car broke down, and then whenever he was getting ready to pull out, someone was beeping the horn at him, telling him to get out, which ends up being Ruthie Cohen. And earlier in the episode, Dina had met George at a park, which I thought you think it's like, oh, is she trying to come on to him, even though he's engaged? But it turns out she thinks that George was telling her about Lloyd to cover up that he's the one who's gone insane. He's just obsessively talking about Lloyd Braun, basically, and his mental breakdown and whatnot. And of course, he goes even, and of course, with him going nuts about, him thinking he's got shortchanged, and then he sees Ruthie Cohen going through the park on a horse, and of course, in the midst of that, while he's trying to tell Ruthie off when she's trying to take his parking spot, she goes, "Your car's on fire," and sure enough, it was. Now he was right next to that guy who Elaine complained about the hose, so he didn't have the hose. And then he uses his broom to try to put out the fire, but it didn't work. His John Voight car was no more, which actually for real did happen to Tom Gamble, who had his car. That he claimed that the used car salesman told him that it had belonged to John Voight. He did have his car literally catch on fire and he get destroyed, the John Voight car. But of course, then the guy with the hose earlier got yelled for not using his hose, so he pulled his hose back out, which would come back to bite Elaine later. So, getting back to the whole Lloyd Braun story with, and of course, with Jerry and Elaine. Elaine sees Lloyd for the first time, and of course, Elaine doesn't want to be with him, and neither does Jerry, because he's tired of, Kramer basically, telling him he's got to, basically bow down and kiss his feet, basically. So they come up with an excuse that, they didn't want to, sit together, so they wanted to go sit towards the front in a movie that was being screened. Well, then Kramer then covers up, what do they think, am I crazy, or do they not want to sit with me? And Kramer's like, no, Jerry says to sit up close because he forgot his glasses. Jerry did not wear glasses at the time. So in the Lost and Found, he had to give Jerry this pair of glasses that he had to wear whenever he saw Lloyd. Until he found out that Kramer's trying to invest in some entertainment with some costumes from these old time movies. So he gets in touch with Jeffrey Harwood, and they end up being his glasses. So Jerry, of course, has to give Kramer back those glasses, and he takes these other big thick rimmed glasses that Jerry can't see a thing out of them. So much so the fact that even when Lloyd was driving Jerry somewhere, George tries to get his attention. He didn't even see George because of how blurry the glasses were. Also, because of the blurry glasses, Jerry pulls out a $100 bill, doesn't realize it, and Lloyd Braun buys $100 worth of that gum. And then Elaine, during the movie, she's eating popcorn, her button falls off, and it opens up her blouse, and basically her cleavage shows, and that's what leads Lloyd to think that, Elaine's coming on to him again, and she's crazy. Well, then Elaine gets sprayed on by the hose guy and gets all wet. And then once again, when Lloyd sees her like that, he thinks she's coming on to him again. And then at the end of the episode, whenever it's that Jeffrey Harwood guy had found the button when he looked through the Lost and Found trying to find his glasses that Kramer gave to Jerry. He finds the button, and Elaine thinks it's hers, but then the way she's trying to take the button off and giggling, Lloyd thinks that she's trying to hit on him, basically. And he's like, wow, she really needs to find a boyfriend or whatnot. And then at the end of the episode, Kramer saw this King Henry VIII costume. He had someone to dress up in, but Jeffrey said something about how they need more of a short, stocky guy to wear that costume, which ends up being George. And then George was trying to buy some gum, I think it was, or something he was trying to buy from a convenience store, which Larry David actually was the clerk there. Turns out that this is actually Larry David's last on-screen appearance for Seinfeld. He had a few cameo on screens. And then Dina, who thought he'd gone crazy, finally believed George he wasn't, but then he sees George in that costume and she thinks he's crazy yet again. And that's the gum. Like I said, it's not the smoothest episode, but it's just whatever. The only thing that stands out from this episode to me, besides the John Voight car catching on fire, was Kramer, basically, telling everybody to bow down and kiss Lloyd Braun's feet. Like, don't tell him he's crazy or whatnot. And it just drove everyone nuts. And then Elaine, when she did want Lloyd to think she was coming on to him, he ended up thinking that because of an accident with her button and her getting sprayed on, basically. So that's the gum. Nothing else really to say about this. I believe the next one is the Rye. That's a good one. I like the Rye. I mean, it's not as good to me as like the Sponge or the Secret Code, but I feel like it's a more known episode because, of course, of what Jerry did. He stole a marble rye off of an old lady, but we'll talk about that in the next episode of this review series. So, guys, I will see you guys in the Rye episode next. What's your thoughts on the gum? Do you agree it's just a meh episode? Make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comments section below, and be sure as always to slap a like on the video, subscribe for more content on my channel, and follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Until then, guys, I am checking out. I'll catch you all later. Have a great rest of your night, and peace out, everybody.